Welcome to another episode of This Isn't About Me podcast. And today I'm really excited to talk to my sweet friend Cheri, who we always have really good, really soulful conversations. They're quite often long conversations. I know that we can both be chatty and wordy. So we don't, per usual, really exactly know where we're going to go with it, but Cheri is such a pleasure to spend time with and such a joy and a light in my life.
Mm.
And I just always, always love my time with you, Cheri. So thank you for being here.
I'm
And
delighted.
I am going to let Cheri, per usual, introduce herself, and then we'll dive in and see where the conversation goes.
That sounds good. Leanne, first of all, I'm so glad to be on this with you and to chat and see where this goes. That's one of my most favorite things to do. And you two are near and dear to me. I'm a coach, a speaker, a trainer, all those kinds of things. I've been all of those different things in over the last 30 years of my life. Right now, I'm primarily see myself as a coach, and I work with people who are wanting to live with intention, who are feeling overwhelmed, but they still have big dreams. And I help them design their life on purpose, because it's my belief and my experience that you don't accidentally have the life you want. So I help people do it with intention.
I love it.
Sort of me
I
in a nutshell.
Yes, it
Mhm.
is. In a very short nutshell.
That was a lot. That was very concise for me, wasn't that, Lee?
It's a very, very concise description of
Mhm.
you, my friend. And I know that that is not all that you are. There's
Right.
so much more in there about who you are. But thank you for the intro. And I guess the most obvious, like easiest place to start to dive in is with your business, your
Mhm.
tagline of
Okay.
design your life on purpose. I remember at one point we had a conversation about sort of where that came from and
Mhm.
what that means,
Okay.
what it means to you and how you do that. I know this is a very loaded question, but I feel like it'll
That's what
all sort of
I love to talk about it. Yeah.
I know. So I think it'll all lead into other stuff. So I'd
Okay.
love if you feel like talking about it, share that.
Sure. Sure. Well, I'll kind of tell you it's a little bit of a story. So go back a couple of years, and I was doing all the things you're supposed to do. You get married, you have kids, you live your life, and then all of a sudden I found myself single. I found myself with two kids with special needs. I found myself on the stages as a motivational speaker, but not feeling very motivated. And can I cuss on this?
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
my life felt like a shit show, but
Mhm.
I really, really didn't want anybody to know that, because for crying out loud, I was a motivational speaker and needed to look like I was all put together. But the reality was things weren't going so hot. And I kept peeking out the window for a man on a white horse, or some kind of savior, or some kind of, quick fix to do it. And then I, for some reason, kind of just realized, and I don't think I really realized this in the moment, Leanne, but I realized that on some level, if I was going to be happy, I was going to have to do it. That
Mhm.
nobody was coming, nothing was going to fix this. And again, I didn't really know that at the time, but I just know I had a whole lot of heartbreak. Then fast forward, I'm sitting on my back deck in the house that I'm in now, looking into the eyes of the love of my life, and all of a sudden I went, well, how in the hell did I get here? How'd that go from snotty nosed tears, paycheck to paycheck, one crisis after the other? And when I say crisis, I mean capital C crisis. I'm not just saying that to be a good storyteller. Hard things. And so I reverse engineered it, and I realized that all along the way, during those really hard times, I was also doing these things that was setting intention. I would roll my eyes and do it anyway. I would create the vision board. I would write the mantra on my wrist. I would scrape together funds and go to a workshop. I would surround myself with people who saw me more clearly. I would, do these hard things, and not all of them were hard, but when you're in that really low time, some of them felt silly or fake or benign.
Mhm.
But then when I'm over here, then I realized, no, that all added up. to the life that I have now, there's no way I could have created the life I have now if I truly had been only feeling the bad stuff. So that's what I realized, that in this time in my career, I'm getting ready to turn 60 this year. And that one of the things I figured out is that you won't accidentally have what you want.
Yeah.
You got to do it with intention. And that's a buzzword that we all kind of know or say, but I began to really quantify it in my work. What does that mean? That means figuring out what you're going to do on a Tuesday, what you're going to do on a Wednesday. And what I've really figured out, get this one, Leanne, is that most of the things that we have to do to create the life we love are boring and unsexy.
Mm.
But having the life you love is the sexiest thing ever.
Yeah.
So that's sort of how I've come to realize that this is what I'm here to do in this next chapter of my life. And I've kind of always done this to help people get unstuck. I've motivated people to watch their mindset. It's all kind of been there, but it didn't all come together till I kind of got on the other side of my own crisis. That I went, oh, this is a thing we can do. People can do this.
Yeah. I love that.
Mm.
There's like a whole lot of stuff you just dropped in there.
I did, didn't I? Just talked forever. Sorry. I was on a roll. Could you feel it?
I know. I love it. I love it. I'm like, which way? Um, yeah. I mean, I'm curious if you feel like expanding on, you made a good point about like a lot of the things that we have to do are really unsexy.
Mm-hmm.
If you can expand on that,
Sure.
and explain a little bit of what you mean by
I would
that.
love to. And that one is really just now coming into focus for me. Well, think about this. If you want to save, $8,000 to go to Europe, and you got to put $100 in the bank, and then another $100 in the bank, and then another $100 in the bank. There's nothing grand. Nobody toots a horn. No, it's pretty unsexy. It means you don't get to go out to dinner. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of mundane and not very sexy.
Mm-hmm.
Then all of a sudden you have that pool of money. Same thing. You go to, you lift your arm weights, and then all of a sudden you look in the mirror and you're like, oh, I have strong arms. And that the things that add up to the things that most of us really want, let's say we want connection with other people. You don't just snap your fingers and you have deep, meaningful connection. You get out and you meet somebody, and you meet another person, and then you ask them out for coffee, and then that person ended up being a dud, and you ask out another person. and then when you all of a sudden have connection is when you go, oh, I have it because I did that thing. So and really, with my coaching and with my husband, we have a meeting every Sunday, to plan our week. And this is so corny, but on our goals for the year is how many people we want to have dinner with, because we won't accidentally go have dinner with cool people if we don't, very unsexy, like, put it on the to-do list to call somebody for dinner.
I love that.
Does that make sense? So what I
Yeah.
mean by unsexy, it's just not grandiose. It's not filled with lightness and inspiration. It's a thing you go do.
Yeah.
Oh, you look at your friends and you pick one and you call them, and then you have dinner. And then you go, wow, that was great.
Yes.
So
And
that's
soul
what I
filling.
mean. Yeah.
Yeah. I love your point about like nobody's gonna like celebrate you for doing all those little things,
Nobody
and
cares,
it's so
right?
true.
No. Nobody toots a
Nobody cares.
horn when you did the thing.
I
Mm-mm.
love to the point about, I just had this conversation with someone else about the the ability, or they like about looking back. You can't teach while you're in the shit, basically.
Right.
And you're not going to actually put all the pieces together or figure out that process until you look back on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was saying, like, I remember seeing something on social media that actually, I think I just had this conversation with Heather
Mm-hmm.
about like sharing from a place of quote unquote healed. I know
Mhm.
we're never actually healed,
Right.
fully healed, but like from your
Mhm.
healed place, not from your healing place, like not
Right.
from when you're in the shit. It's hard to see through it when you're in it.
Right.
And really the best is to really look back. So I love that you've really been able to
Mhm.
do that, not only just look back, but also to gather all those lessons and all those pieces and see how they all fit together to create this amazing system that you now use with your clients,
Right.
and you teach it and you
Mhm.
put it into practice every day now because
Mhm.
you were able to gather all those things together.
Absolutely. I don't know why my camera's gone
I
fuzzy
know.
for
Where'd
some
you go?
reason.
You left me.
I know it does it all the time. Well, but I'll tell you something. I have some insight about that, or I don't. I've learned some insight. I didn't have it, but there's some work by Dr. Daniel Friedland who did some amazing work on the brain, but really helping us understand psychological safety and what our brain does when we're in a crisis.
Hmm.
And and as I've understood that, it's made me have a lot of compassion for myself and my clients who, when they're in a hard place, which clients will often come to me when they're in a hard place or in a place of overwhelm, there should be no shame that we can't sit down and methodically create a plan. When I'm in the pits of a depression, I suffer with depression. When I'm in a bad depression, the best thing for me to do is to go for a walk. Do you know what the last thing I want to do is to
Go for
go
that
for a
walk.
freaking fracking walk, right? And I'm smart and I know it.
Hmm.
But when we're in a place, our brains just don't often allow us to be creative. We're in reactive mode. And so we're reacting to the crisis of the day. It's partly why we can't go out and teach from that place. We're not even seeing it. And so I think for me, I'll just say this, when I really embrace that, I'm able to have so much compassion for myself and for my clients and for my friends who are struggling to do something that maybe they were able to do before. Like, why can't I do it now? I had my shit together 2 years ago and now everything's falling apart. I'm like, well, no, your brain, you just can't see the way. This is why I'm such a believer in coaching and such a believer in friends and community and support. Because and also why I'm such a believer in helping people come up with very simple, unsexy things to get out of the hole, because our brains can do that. And but when we understand that, often we're in the middle of it, we need somebody to throw us a life rope or give us a ladder, and then we can get back to, and it's really, we can get back to where we were because now we're in a different part of our brain. We're in that neocortex. We're up here where we can actually feel the love. We can come up with true stepping stones. But when we're back in that crisis place, we just can't.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, yeah, it's real.
Yeah. I relate.
Yeah, I see that in your face that you relate to that, dear.
I
Uh,
relate.
mhm,
There's a lot going on, even,
mhm,
in my personal life. And then, I was recently reflecting back. A lot has changed for me over the last year, but also, we had a lot of like family stuff going on throughout the fall. And
mhm,
I just moved into this new place in August. I moved out of my house, and I think I've mentioned on here somewhere, but I'm going through a separation and moved out of my house. And I was like in my new house for like, I don't know, the first 2 weeks alone. And then since then, I have not been home on any of my off weeks where it's just been me. I've been like either traveling or working or with family. And as I got through the holidays and got through Christmas, and I I earmarked like the week after Christmas to actually just like literally sit and cry was my plan.
mhm, mhm, good. Yeah.
Literally my plan for a week was to like sit and cry and just like let everything process. Because I knew like especially through those holidays, man, like
Mhm.
life is freaking tough through the
Yep.
holidays, and it's just one thing after another after another. but my aunt passed away in October while I was on a trip. And her granddaughter was away for a semester in Europe. So they waited to do her service until December 18th. So a
Mm.
week before Christmas,
Mm-hmm.
we had to go and do that. In between, my mom had a surgery, like a pretty major surgery she had to do. So I was there taking care of her. Like it was just a lot.
Yeah.
And post Christmas, I was like, I just know, like for myself, the way that I process is through tears. And so I was like, I'm just
Yes.
gonna like sit and cry. And so for 3 days, I did anytime I felt that urge to cry,
Mm-hmm.
I just let it out. And sometimes it was for a minute, sometimes it was for 10, but I sat by myself at my house when I didn't have my kids, let myself cry for those days. And after 3 days, I was like, all right, I need to like go see somebody. Like I need people again.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
way too
Yeah.
much. But I finally, in that moment, in that week, everybody's also the whole like end of the year crap and like, what are your goals and your intentions for the next year? And I was like, I can't even fathom next year.
Right.
And in fairness, it always takes me to like March to get into a new year anyway. But like, I was like, I don't know. Like, I'm just trying to like get through this. And in that time, I really sat for a while and realized like, holy crap, it's been quite the year. And a lot of stuff has happened this year.
Yeah.
And
Big stuff.
there's been a lot of stuff to process. And not even the year, but like we moved the year before that, and that was massive. And it's just been like one thing after another. So I really relate with that sort
Mm-hmm.
of survival mode almost, and like, and
Yes.
not, and what you're saying about not being able to be fully up in the creative mode.
Right.
Because it's tough.
It is tough. I think we, especially when we start to have one thing after another, which more and more people I know would describe themselves as one thing right after the other, we start to normalize it. We start to normalize it so that we don't even recognize that we're in this crisis place. It becomes our normal. So then what we don't tend to modify is our expectations of ourselves. So we're like, oh, everybody else is having to move. Everybody else went through the pandemic. People move every day. People separate every day, or spend 6 months, whatever the language is. We try to, in some way, shame ourselves or talk ourselves into being able to be, to do the next thing, because March, just go do it. And then, but I just want to reflect, your intuition, girl, was spot on. I need to frickin' cry,
Hmm.
and so that is a powerful awareness you had on some level, that you needed that space and you needed to cry. And I also just want to applaud that you knew, and that January, this self-imposed time for us to sit down and create things. I think more people than not want to throw the bullshit flag on January. They're just coming out of the holidays, which most people hate. I don't know if you know that, but it's most people do. We say we don't, but we really do, or at least we come out of it stressed. I
Yes,
don't know that we hate it, but
right.
so
It's a
then we're going to
lot.
sit and make a plan.
Yeah.
And I've got a coaching group and starting, and I specifically said February,
Yeah.
because we think we're ready in January. There's this, so all this thing that you just did, and first of all, I just want to hold you on all of those big things.
Thank you.
And that, sure, they're normal, and that normal people do those things all the time, but the pace and the time it takes to process or to acclimate to a family member no longer being here, to the where you live is different than where you lived before. That takes time.
Yeah.
And I just think, as a culture, we try to fast forward through that, and or spiritual bypass, jump over, and then it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It
Yeah.
doesn't. So kudos to you to know
Yeah.
this about yourself and to have that real self-awareness.
Yeah.
That's really powerful.
Thank you. Actually, on my list of things for 2023 really is to continue to hone that intuition and
Mhm.
listen better and really work on that.
Mhm.
Um, but that's also a slow process and really it takes a lot of practice there too, and also unsexy and
Yeah, and it
not
goes
real
against what
fun.
culture wants to tell you to do. It's pretty counterculture
Yeah,
to go slow and to not push and to all
yeah,
that. It's counter. So
yeah.
it's a
It's
beautiful goal.
interesting. Thank
Mhm.
you. It's interesting since we moved to Vermont. Vermont's like a very slow sort of
Mhm.
going pace of
Mhm.
things. Like
Mhm.
life is busy, but it's just generally kind of like slower. And I have loved it. Like it's
Mm.
been so good for me as my little like empath self. And
Yes.
I love just sort of like days where you just don't really know what's going on and there's not a gazillion things to do,
Mhm.
like fun centers for the kids. It's like go outside and
Yeah.
go for a hike or something instead. And if you're
Yeah.
bored, go find something to do versus just all this stuff that like we used to have. But really, yeah, I was so craving like just being home alone and like
Mhm.
in the quiet with no noise and no
Yeah.
people that need me and no plans and no nothing. And I think it's so, to your point, like it's so pushed culturally to just like keep going and going and going. And it's kind of hard sometimes to make yourself listen to
Mhm.
that message that's like, and also
Oh,
to
yeah.
sit in nothing and like the like I'm used to sort of like I can sit and like binge watch I've watched a lot of Netflix in the last 6
Yes.
months. A lot of Netflix. I think I've watched almost everything there is. But to sit in just like silence is even pretty uncomfortable for me. And it is uncomfortable, but so needed. And all of that
Mm.
unsexy stuff, just like you're saying, and just to sit and let yourself cry or let yourself write
Yeah.
or, take stock of your finances and figure out, paying your bills and all of that stuff.
Right.
It's not fun and it's not sexy, but so like we need to do those things to be able to push forward,
Exactly.
right?
One of the ways I say that, first of all, I think you're spot on. And I've got two things to say if you don't hear.
Hmm.
That fear, that silence is deafening for many people. And I watch culture, I watch myself. I'm an extrovert, and being alone, that was the hardest part about my own divorce, is I was alone, and I never was before. And I had to work. It took me several years to build the muscle up to enough to be alone and it not mean other things. So just for anyone who's listening to this,
Yeah.
that if it's hard for you, you're in a club. It's hard for all of us.
Yeah.
But then you were talking about looking at finances, and one of the things I learned years ago from one of my therapists, which has so helped me, was she said, she was talking to me about this phrase, and I think it comes from 12 step, to be happy, joyous, and free. Like the goals is like her goal for herself was to be happy, joyous, and free. And I said, well, tell me what that means. What is it? And she said this. She said, happy is the byproduct of responsible behavior. And I took that in. Sometimes people say something, it goes zing, and all of a sudden I got it. That happy is different than joy. Joy to me is when I see a beautiful, flower, or there's a sunset, or I'm peeing my pants laughing. But happy is this satisfied feeling I get most often when I've done something that needed to be done. Like
Mm,
doing my taxes and I get them done, I sit in this kind of happiness that says, I did the thing that needed to be done. The happy you feel after you exercised it, the happy you feel after you had a hard conversation, or the happy you feel after sitting in silence, so that the connection of I'm calling it responsible behavior, but doing the things need to be done for your life, that's a kind of happiness that when I got that phrase, I went, oh my goodness, that means I get to be happy even when shit's hitting the fan.
mm, mhm.
So my kids, I had these two special needs kids. and one was also physically ill. And then, of course, I was also working with school systems to teach them differently. And I was going to all these therapy sessions. But what I discovered was that when I could take control and choose how I was going to respond to all that, my ability to respond, and I could respond to it from a place where I felt good about it, I was able to actually have happiness even when things were hard.
Mhm.
So when you just said sitting down and looking at your finances, sitting down and doing those things, again, unsexy, does that make sense that you get this feeling of, and you might not use the word happy, but there's a feeling there, right? Of
Yeah.
doing this,
Yeah.
showing up. I'm curious about what you think about that. Does that land or make sense?
Yeah, I feel like I'm letting it sink in a little bit because that
Mhm.
they're simple words, but there's a lot there.
There's a lot there. That's right.
And for me, also, I've been trying, it's words are funny for me. So I was just saying that um a lot of my numerology chart points to me being in communication, and like
Mhm.
communication is really important for me. And so words are really important for me. And the more I'm feeling into my empath self and then learning about human design, everything I process through feeling. So
Mhm.
feeling and words. So I'm like trying to let it land.
Gotcha.
But I've had this sort of ongoing battle with myself about the word joy.
Mhm.
So it's funny that you kind of brought that up.
Mhm.
Um, because I actually don't really resonate with the word joy.
Mhm.
I find it difficult. And personally, I'm like, I think I also almost am having trouble with the word happy too, but the feel
Mhm.
like what you're saying, what I feel when I do those things is almost like a contentment and a
Oh,
satisfaction,
that's a good word. Yeah.
which is related, right? Very
Mhm.
related to happy. But I noticed also in trying to identify joy, because I was like, sometime last year, I was like, I'm on a mission to like re-find my joy and like do
Mhm.
things that bring me joy. But like I couldn't do it because I couldn't
Mhm.
resonate with the word. And I was like, what I what is joy? Like what even is it? And like how do you get it? And where does it come from? And like
Yes, and why don't I
like
have some now?
why don't I have it? I know I'm like a pretty happy person, but like joy just felt so weird. So then I finally switched it. And I think during that week in December, I realized it was more for me personally, was about, I said in 2023, one of my focuses will be to do what feels good,
Mm.
which again related to joy. But the simple switch in the words for me
Mhm.
was so powerful.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. I just find words so interesting, and how,
Right.
if you don't resonate with them with one, there might be one something else closely, like a close cousin that's related, that can just
Yeah,
completely change the way that you feel and the way that it can get through to you.
absolutely.
And yeah, so that's, sorry, a tangent, but
No, no, I think,
the power
in
of
fact,
words is just fascinating to
well,
me.
I'm so glad you said it, because I found that even when I've said this, with my clients or on my own podcast, I talk about, I mean, happy is a loaded word, or at least defined differently. Joy is a really loaded word. I don't resonate with joy or either. What about the word responsibility? Some people cringe and want to vomit. And I just said
Totally.
happy and responsibility in the same sentence. Yeah, so they don't necessarily go together. So it's hard to explain this concept, but I think that that's the power of words. And so we have to be, especially when people are saying words to us, or we're repeating them to ourselves. In my head, I have joy shame all the time because people look like they're out there having joy. And
Hmm.
I don't resonate with that word either.
Yeah, it's funny,
I
isn't it?
Mhm. Yeah, and
We
then
gotta
and
let it
people want to put it on posters and walls, and
find
I'm
your joy. I'm
find
like,
your
what the
joy, and
fuck
I'm like,
even is
I
joy?
want
I
to
don't know.
flip the big bird at them. So it's like, but yet then I feel like I'm deficient in some way,
Right.
or I'm lacking something. I'm a
Yes, I was just gonna say that. Yeah.
Enneagram. So I'm like, I'm missing. I didn't get the joy muscle. And so
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 how I felt for 6 months, right? And I'm
yes.
like, how I don't understand because like I'm not really I'm actually super happy and joyful
Mhm,
and feeling really good.
mhm,
But when I sit down to think about what brings me joy and how I get that,
mhm.
it's like a complete blank
Like,
page. I'm like, I have no idea. Like, then yeah, to your point, you start to feel like deficient, like something's
mhm,
wrong with me. I don't know how to make joy in my life. I don't know how to make that happen. So there
mhm.
must be something wrong with me and my life must suck and I must not be a happy person because I
Yeah.
don't know what joy is to me or how to like make joy.
Yeah, yeah. I had a friend, she was actually a client first, she became a friend, and she had a therapist or somebody say, "Well, you need to go out and have fun." And
Right.
this was
Same
like,
thing.
this woman hated it. So we begrudgingly went and bowled. She didn't have fun. I had fun watching her try to have fun, but there was this sort of this simple solution. And if I can, one of the things I've also noticed is that, and I kind of play on the words with my business of being purposeful. I think that having these purposeful conversations, and we ask ourselves purposeful questions,
Mhm.
and when it doesn't land, just what you did, you were curious. Why didn't this land for me? Why is joy not working for me? And I think that might be one of the takeaways from what you just said for the listeners, is that if something's not landing, then just, instead of us jumping to shame thinking it
Mhm.
should, let's be curious. I'm curious, why is joy not working? Or I'm curious, what word feels better than joy?
Mhm.
That curiosity is often the thing that can come in and save us from shaming ourselves for or whatever's going on. Does that make
Yeah,
sense? Yeah.
totally. And there's so much power in like finding the right words
Mm-hmm.
and like even when actually almost exactly it'll be Valentine's Day 2 years ago when
Mm-hmm.
I call it my empath epiphany when I figured out I was an empath, even
Mm-hmm.
to like have the word to describe what I had felt my whole life. There's so much more like freedom and validation and power in having the right words
Mm-hmm.
to describe something going
Yes.
on or a situation
Yes.
or anything. Like there's just I felt so much lighter
Mm-hmm.
and you were talking about shame and I think a lot of that was immediately released because for so much of my life I was sort of not meanly picked on but people would comment on how I cry all the time
Yeah.
and like that my skin is really sensitive and I didn't know that was different from anyone else
Yeah.
and I didn't know that there was actually like a name, right? And then once I learned about being an empath and highly sensitive person from my incredible friend Stacy Friedman, um I like was sending her messages for days just being like my entire life makes sense right now. And it's like when
That's
you
so,
find the right words,
mm-hmm.
it's so powerful
Yeah.
and so much can change.
Yeah, and gosh, first of all, I love that for you. I could feel that, just that validation or coming home to yourself. That's so beautiful.
Mhm.
And what I'm struck about is that all of a sudden I flipped to folks. I want to add to it is that sometimes those words get to change too. So
Mm,
I was thinking about listeners who might say, well, I used to feel a way, but it doesn't work for me anymore. That this idea of naming and claiming and using our words, just a slight little reminder to let those be fluid.
totally.
They don't always, they may not be always and forever the thing. And I've had shame in the past because things that I declared as my truth at one point shifted. And was I not committed before? Did I get it wrong last time?
Right.
Versus no, it's just an evolution. So for folks listening to this, that words can be fluid, I guess
Yeah.
is to
Yeah.
say about
I
that.
was just grabbing also, I was going to add to that that Last year I read
Mm.
Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown, actually in a book club with Stacy.
Uh-huh.
And there was uh, my point in that was to say that sometimes we learn new words to describe something too, to your
Yes.
point of like it can change, right? And maybe you didn't have a word before, you didn't know before. And when I was reading Atlas of the Heart, which is like a fantastic book, but it's like reading an encyclopedia of feelings, of like
Mhm.
emotions.
Yeah.
Like it's not like the most enthralling book to
Mhm.
read, but it was fantastic to do as a book club because it gave us an opportunity to sort of like digest all of it and break it down
Mhm.
into parts. Um, but as I was reading through it, all of a sudden, like my vocabulary opened up to different things too, and realized like she even talks in there actually about the word shame, right? And like actually what it actually means to feel shame. And a lot of times it's actually not shame. I'm pretty sure if I'm getting the information right.
Mhm.
Like it's a different, it might be guilt we feel, or it
Mhm.
might be embarrassment.
Right.
And we label it as shame because it's like the only word that we know, or the only thing that like the way people have described it.
Yeah.
But once I was sort of reading through this, and I keep it right at my desk and I'll reference it, where like I'll even just like look at the different words that are an option so I can pick the right one.
Yeah.
So sometimes also the vocabulary can
Mhm.
expand and our understanding of a word can expand so that we can find the right words to describe how we're feeling in any given moment. And by the way, we're often feeling many things at the same time.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's not singular, it's not
It doesn't
linear,
have to
it's
be
a big
one.
fat mess.
Well, just recently, I started a different kind of journaling practice at my birthday. For my 59th year, I decided to do this new process every day going to 60. And I went on Pinterest, or I Googled, you can find this. I found this wheel of emotion, and
Mm.
it's like a tire that goes out about 4 rungs. And I have found it so helpful for me to go and find the exact word, because my journaling practice starts with my current emotion.
Ooh, I like that.
So I go in, and you can start like with sad, mad, glad, frustrated, and then it goes out 2 or 3 layers, and you have these little forks in the road, and it helps you discern between being this or this, and then you can drill it down another layer and another layer. I can't credit whoever put together this graphic, but for anybody listening, you can Google it. I have found it so helpful for me to really distinguish, instead of just saying, I just feel yucky today. Well, what does yucky
Yeah.
mean? What does yucky mean? Or I feel good today. What does good mean? Are you
Mhm.
happy? Are you buoyant or exuberant? Are you anticipating? Are you optimistic? And all those nuances have really helped me. First of all, it helps me understand I wake up most of the days on the side. Uh, but I mean, it's the truth.
Right.
I stay there. It's just how I wake up. But
Mhm.
helps me really deepen my understanding of my emotions. And
Mhm.
so, uh, because I found I was just writing the same 5 words over and over, and I thought there are way more emotions than this. So
So many. I think what
go
is it like
Google.
63 in this book or
Yeah, a lot.
something?
In
Like,
fact,
and they're not all fully, like she even said, they're not all emotions, but
right, but
I
they,
mean, there's so many words in here that I have heard, right? Like we've heard them. One of the most profound ones I feel like for me in her description in this book was on overwhelm,
mm,
which is, related to stress and anxiety and worry. Um, and she says, actually, overwhelm is like the top of the ladder where your brain has actually just like stopped and
mm,
you're just like, her example in there is like, I think she was working in a restaurant one time and it's like you drop a tray of silverware, nobody's food is coming out right, like you just don't have words and you're in a place where you're like, I need to remove myself from this situation
mhm,
and go take 10 minutes to breathe because you literally can't
right.
think, or act or do anything. And that is actually overwhelm. But we
Mhm.
use overwhelm in a way that should actually be described, should be using a different word. I'm really stressed right now, or I'm feeling anxious, or we use it in a way that's not the actual
Exactly.
emotion, which was
Exactly.
so interesting to me. But I still use overwhelm all the time, but for a while I really like stopped using it altogether because I was like, I can still think, I can still act. I'm not out of my body. I'm still here. I'm still functioning.
Right. Well, I even described my clients are overwhelmed. Not really. I mean, because if
Right.
no one hires a coach when they're truly overwhelmed, they wouldn't have the ability to do that, right?
Right.
In true
Yeah.
overwhelm, you can't, you're just sobbing in a corner.
Right.
But it is a word we use, and I think so that's a great example of, especially if we're trying to connect with somebody, we've got to use the words that they're using. But then I just thought how powerful that is for when you're feeling overwhelmed. Then you go, okay, wait a minute. Actually, I'm not.
Hmm.
I'm not as far down that path as I thought I was. I'm
Yeah. And there's a lot of
stressed.
power in that, right?
Yeah.
Like as soon as you said that, I was like, it feels like a pulling back of your power,
Mm.
like pulling that back in. Like,
I have the
actually,
ability
no.
to respond, right? Which that's what
Yeah.
I do with. I have the responsibility. I mean, I have the ability to respond to this situation because I'm not truly in overwhelm,
Hmm.
And um, if I can, can I tell you another little story real quick?
Oh, always.
So speaking of true overwhelm, or I thought it was, newly divorced, sitting in my living room, had a minivan, and I had $5,000 in savings, and I was sitting in my new house all alone, whatever. Minivan breaks, and the bill is $4,997. I had $5,000. And I immediately went into this whole thing. I've got nothing. My world is, everybody betrayed me. Nobody knows. Blah, 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 blah. I'm sure you can just I was just absolutely swirling
Hmm.
in unsafety. I was really in that reptile brain I was talking about earlier, that I don't have what's needed to take care of this. And all of a sudden I got this download from spirit, and it was an acronym for the word fear. And it was it was find evidence of your actual reality.
Mm.
F.E.A.R. And I sat there in the floor and I started in breathing and going, okay, there's food in the refrigerator. I'm getting paid from my largest contractor next month. All my bills are paid. I had $5,000 for an emergency. A transmission going out is an emergency. I mean, I just started cataloging the facts
The
and my fear,
reality. Yeah.
the reality.
Hmm.
Uh, and so that the feelings weren't the facts. I mean, I was factually having them, but I was that what I was saying to myself in that place of fear or panic or even frankly overwhelm all of a sudden.
Totally.
I crawled out of that hole by doing just what we were doing right then with overwhelmed. No, I'm not overwhelmed. I'm simply stressed. That's big,
Right.
but I and then this is hilarious. So I'm crawling out of this hole, and the phone rings, and I answer it, and it said it was the Unitarian Universalist Church in the community I lived in, and they asked me if they could hire me to give a sermon. Are you ready for this? On prosperity consciousness. That's what I got asked to preach on, after I had just had my moment where I was flayed open by not having enough abundance or money. I thought that is some hilarious stuff right there. That is some hilarious stuff right there.
Oh, were you at a point where you could recognize
I
like
did.
the irony? Because I feel like sometimes people are like, oh, it's just a coincidence. Like it's easy to brush those things up. Knowing
Yeah,
my
I
intuitive
got
little
it.
connected self, I'm like, oh, what a sign.
I got it more as I'm standing up to do the sermon a couple of months later, because the story kept evolving in my knowing. But I did get that was quite hilarious. Um, Yeah, but
I love that.
not funny, not funny. Yeah.
I love the way the universe works like
It's
that.
so funny. I know. I know. But that little tool, I will tell you, has saved my ass so many times because I go into a feeling of overwhelm. I would use that word. I'm
For sure,
overwhelmed.
yeah. Hmm.
And when I start cataloging the facts, not in a judgy way and not in a shameful way and not, but just to that in a loving way to that really tender part of me that's overwhelmed. Say, wait on just like I would to my child. Wait a minute, honey bunny. This is the deal. We got 35 cents in the couch cushion. We got, we got, or if it were about something else, you would just catalog the truth. And that has calmed my little reptilian brain and my central nervous system. Then you can make a plan. We can't jump to fixing the overwhelm. So
Hmm.
I don't know that story. It was true. It was a true download. It's only happened a few times to me, but that was a true download. So,
I love that. I
mhm.
love that so much. Oh, well, thank you for sharing. I'm gonna pull those both of those things up, so we'll have them in the we'll have them in the show notes
Okay.
um for your fear, and I'm gonna try and find your emotion wheel.
I'll email it to you.
Okay, good. Perfect.
Yeah.
There we
Yep, yep, yep.
go. All right, we're already at 45 minutes,
Okay.
which is insane.
Hmm.
Um, is there anything else that you feel like you want to share about you or any like big lessons in life that you feel? I mean, you are full of stories and lessons,
I have
and
lots of those
I
stories.
love I
Oh,
love listening to all the things that you have to share all
thank
the
you.
time.
Thank you. You know, I think as we're landing this airplane, I think I'll just sort of repeat the thing I'm just so passionate about. And also the thing that I want to be that truth telling mama who just tells you something you might not want to hear. And
Hmm.
here's the thing, and it's really the good news, is that you're 100% responsible to create the life you want. Ain't
Hmm.
nobody coming. And that doesn't mean I don't believe in magic. I believe magic can happen, but you got to show up. You know what I mean? It's like I believe in magic all day long, but it doesn't randomly show up. It shows up because you're ready to see the magic. So you gotta step into that power, even if you're snotty nosed tears and even if you're limping and even if it feels just barely enough. That's the deal. But I've watched too many people do one of two things. They either constantly look for someone to rescue them because they don't think they can do it for themselves, or they spend most of their time blaming somebody else for where they are right now. Neither one of those are standing in our power. And I spent a lot of years doing those two things. And so and what I mean by standing in the power is to just go, I got to have my own back. Nobody is, and I kept saying, I want to be on somebody's radar screen. I want to be the main blip on somebody else's radar screen. Well, dang, I got to be the main blip on my own radar screen.
Mm.
And sometimes that means setting amazing boundaries where other people are sucking the life out of you and there's not enough left for you. And this work isn't easy. The easiest thing is to just live by default, but it is the least satisfying. So if you're wanting specific things to happen in your life, that stepping up and owning that you have to do it, and you have to be willing to do it alone, but you won't do it alone. Do you know what I mean? You won't, because the universe conspires in your favor and there'll be all kinds of angels in support.
Yeah.
But you have to be willing to take the lead on it. And um that's the missing piece for some. And so if you've got that level of dissatisfaction or discontent or whatever, and you can see it and own it, yay, because that means you're ready to do something about it. That's what I want to end on.
Okay. My brain is like, ah, crap. Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's so much that is a lot of work that I've been doing too. I don't think that I have ever like outwardly verbalized before, but I have always been taken care of,
Mhm.
like I've always had a safety net and there's always been people there who have taken care of me. And now it's sort of a time where I need to be my own hero and be fighting for myself. And it's uncomfortable and it's
It
hard.
is.
It's hard to break those patterns and those habits and to really to resource yourself.
Mhm.
And I think you should put that in your marketing stuff.
I should. I should.
Resource
And
yourself because
yeah,
it's a challenge.
and you have a choice. Here's the thing. You don't have to. People all day long don't ever choose to do that. They
Yeah.
choose to find a way for people to take care of them for the rest of their life. But what they're cheating themselves out of is that thing we were talking about a while ago was that level of satisfaction that comes when you own it. And that, so no judgment if you
Yeah.
don't, but for folks who are trying to live and heal and step in, you get to choose to do it
Hmm.
yourself. And like I said, Leanne, I believe this with all my heart, people will still be there to give
Yeah.
you support. Do you know what I mean? You won't truly be alone.
Yeah.
um but no one can want your happiness more than you.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Okay. That's a good place to end.
It is. Oh my
No
gosh,
one
I'm
can
glad
want
they
your
reminded us.
happiness more than you. I
Nobody
love
can
that.
want your happiness more than
Yeah.
you.
I
Hey, I'm
love
gonna
it.
make that in a post right now.
There you
Nobody.
go.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, go follow Cheri so you can see her post about nobody can
Yeah.
want your happiness more than you. I love it.
Uh, well,
Thank
you put
you.
my contact stuff, I guess, in notes, and I'd be delighted. I will just say I have a couple of freebies on my website, some freebie things about how to get unstuck and how to ask purposeful questions. And depending on when you're listening to this, I've got a coaching group coming up that I take you through how to have more happy and less crappy and
Which is like
do it.
my favorite tagline, by the
I
way.
know.
When
I love it.
I know it's so cute when we were working on your
Yeah, that was
stuff before too. So much
yeah.
fun.
So find me, and Leanne, thank you for introducing me to your community, and this was a delicious conversation. Thank you so much.
I loved this. Thank you so much for being here and for always just showing up with so much heart and
Mm.
authenticity. And I really do love your stories. And I
I
could,
got a million of them. I got a
I
million.
could listen to your stories all day. And sometimes I do.
Mhm.
And yes, I just love you to pieces. And thank you for being here and sharing yourself. And we'll be back for another episode next week. So
All
thank
right.
you.